The development of antimicrobial resistance is nothing new.
This is the 21st century, and we have these tools.
I mean, I think antibiotics have a place, but again, I think you have to really be careful in choosing when to use them.
The newer FDA guidelines are basically classifying a handful of antibiotics that are currently provided in feed, and they are adding a number of regulations related to those.
Antibiotic use in the livestock industry has been a controversy for decades. As a result of technological advances in the 1940s, these practices have allowed farmers to treat their sick animals and increase worldwide food production. But many are concerned that the widespread use in industrial-scale farming is contributing to antimicrobial resistance. In the following video, we'll be hearing from several people directly involved with agriculture to further understand this controversial issue.
Antibiotics presented one of the most remarkable developments in human and animal medicine of all time. They were first discovered back in the early 1900s, 1928, and they actually weren't commercially available until towards the end of World War II. So they've really only been used for about 75 years now. That's amazing because we didn't invent antibiotics. They were discovered. They are produced as a natural biological component of bacteria. It's important to know that there are literally millions of species of bacteria. Only a very, very select number of them are pathogens, that is, bacteria that cause disease. So what we've done as we've developed the science of antibiotic use in medicine is identify which ones affect which organisms so that if we have a good diagnosis, then we know which antibiotic will work against which of the pathogenic agents. So antimicrobial resistance is a big, important consideration, but it's not something new, and it's a question of how do we use the antibiotics for optimal benefit, for the amazing way that they can help combat pathogenic, disease-causing bugs, but not then at the same time also adversely influence the bacterial populations in a more general way.
We take care of our animals, and using antibiotics to treat bacterial infections is the approved way to do that in both people and animals. We need a veterinarian's prescription to purchase and a veterinarian's approval on the farm and direction on how to use them. I'm concerned about the health of my animals, and every load of milk that leaves this farm is tested for antibiotics, and so we're quite careful, and all medicines, be it antibiotics or other medicines, have withdrawal periods on them that are printed on the label, that are directed by our veterinarians, and so we follow those, but for the milk, we actually test the milk. The idea that we shouldn't be using them at all is pretty distasteful for me. We really care for our animals, and how can you let an animal suffer? How can you let an animal perhaps die just because of the lack of what is commonly used in our society? Antibiotics are quite useful, and they do a good job, and they protect our animals.
If you look at the spectrum of antibiotics, historically there was a use of those for more efficient production, so it affected average daily gain and feed efficiency, or how much feed it takes to produce a pound of beef. Those label aspects are going to be removed over time per FDA request, that you no longer should feed an antibiotic at a subtherapeutic level for a long time simply for the purposes of increased performance. The concern is over foodborne pathogens, especially if animals consume an antibiotic and then are gone and slaughtered, and if there's fecal contamination of the carcass, potentially you might get some antibiotic-resistant bacteria that might make it to a consumer. The science behind that is not necessarily clear, and there's not a lot of it, but out of an abundance of caution, the government basically said, how are we going to be able to address that? And so consumers put pressure on them, and they said, let's try to restrict the use of antibiotics. So I think the first thing we've seen with the Veterinary Feed Directive, which I think about the last 3 years, FDA has been moving to have some changes in the veterinarians' involvement with antibiotic usage with cattle. That first began with eliminating the growth and efficiency aspects on labels. Now it has come to regulating a handful of antibiotics in terms of their use in feed. But I would see over time that we'll see increased scrutiny over the use of antibiotics in cattle moving beyond feed.
Well, I think the advantages of not using antibiotics are pretty much the obvious. I think you're creating a product that is as pure as possible, more pure meat that's not infused with growth hormones and antibiotics and some of those other things that are causing concern. Every animal has the potential, just like a human, to come in contact with something that might make it sick, but I think the advantages are if you can help that animal along as naturally as possible. You know, a lot of times they can overcome something that they may have come in contact with. Depending on the age of the animal, of when they may encounter something that requires an antibiotic, I will treat them. I will treat them with the best welfare and health for the animal. I just take it out of my program. I don't sell it to somebody. You have to be true to how you're marketing your product. I have had to make some of those difficult decisions where an animal that's been healthy all along, he's going down, you know, a road of possibly requiring antibiotics. I may have to harvest early rather than give it an injection of antibiotics. I don't think all feedlots out there are practicing the same. You have a serious concern about keeping the animal healthy. I think misconceptions come that, you know, all feedlots are bad, they don't care, you know, they readily feed antibiotics. I don't believe all of them do. Antibiotics can be quite expensive, so I don't think that they're too quick, perhaps, to doctor an animal that way. I think the awareness of antibiotic use is a good thing. You know, I think restrictions and more vet oversight is only a positive for the industry.
If producers can follow regulations and use these very powerful technologies properly, I think it's very likely we'll continue to see them. But if there is any type of abuse of antibiotics, then unfortunately I think we may see fewer and fewer antibiotics available. Or I think a lot of consumers just simply don't really understand the use of antibiotics. They don't think that they're closely regulated. Maybe they think that there's just widespread rampant use of antibiotics for inappropriate reasons and simply for profitability, where in fact they're really used for disease control.
I think antibiotic use in animals remains controversial because it's hard to determine, does the good outweigh the bad or does the bad outweigh the good? I think at this point, more and more people believe the bad outweighs the good for growth promotion. However, I think most people would agree, not all, but many, that in the case of treatment of disease, the good outweighs the bad.
There is some evidence that pathogen loads on carcasses and getting into meat could possibly occur, but there simply is no evidence to this point of that being the case. So out of an abundance of caution, the government is choosing to do some regulation, and the beef cattle industry has embraced this and is going along with that. But hopefully over time, producers can work to try to continue to use these powerful tools, antibiotics, in a manner that makes beef and meat very efficient, wholesome, safe, and it's a sustainably produced product that everyone's happy to produce and to consume.
Animals in conventional systems, where we do use antibiotics appropriately, have about as close to zero residue as you can possibly get. And yet the animal gets the benefit of the use, while humans don't end up with residues or other bacterial infections that they can contract.
So we test every animal that leaves our sick pen, whether she was treated with antibiotics or not.
I think creating barriers and oversights and checkpoints are very good.
Generally, the goal is to sort of have a very prudent, judicious use of antibiotics by trying to sort of address some of the things that have come up with the Veterinary Feed Directive.
We do need to change some things, and 10 years from now we'll change something again because we'll learn something we didn't know today. That's progress, that's technology, that's science, and I think it means that as we look forward, we have better and better food production, we have healthier and healthier products, and we have better and better directed use of our medical tools.
While we are on the path to learning more about the relationship between antibiotic use in food animals and the human health risk, the current uncertainty in the evidence makes the controversy a prevalent issue that will continue to evolve. When issues like this involve so many stakeholders and public concern is high, communication plays as critical of a role as any other science.